October 27, 1962 Sargasso Sea. Inside a Soviet submarine, the air is thick enough to taste. The temperature has climbed past 45 degrees Celsius. Sweat drips from the ceiling. Batteries are failing. The crew has been submerged for days, cut off from Moscow, cut off from the world. And somewhere above them, American warships are dropping depth charges. Not weapons meant to destroy but signals. To the men inside submarine B-59, it feels like the beginning of the end. At the center of this pressure stands Vasily Arkhipov, a quiet, disciplined Soviet naval officer. He is not the captain. He does not shout orders. But in this moment, his judgment carries the weight of millions of lives. Because locked inside this submarine is a nuclear torpedo. And the decision to fire it could ignite a war that would not stop at Cuba, Washington, or Moscow but consume the world. Just weeks earlier, the Cold War had slipped into its most dangerous phase. The United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a global standoff, each armed with enough nuclear weapons to erase civilization. On October 14, 1962, American U-2 spy planes photographed Soviet missile sites under construction in Cuba, just 90 miles from Florida. For President John F. Kennedy, it was an unacceptable threat. For Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev, it was a calculated gamble, a way to counter American missiles already pointed at the USSR from Turkey and Europe. The world was suddenly balanced on a razor's edge. By late October, the U.S. Navy had formed a blockade around Cuba. Officially, it was called a quarantine. In reality, it was an act of war in everything but name. Soviet ships were approaching the line. Orders were tense. One mistake, one misunderstood signal could trigger escalation. That mistake came quietly, far from television cameras and press briefings, deep beneath the Atlantic. On October 27, later known as Black Saturday, American destroyers detected B-59 near the blockade zone. Unaware that Soviet submarines carried nuclear torpedoes, U.S. commanders ordered the use of practice depth charges to force the submarine to surface. Inside B-59, the crew believed they were under attack. They had no radio contact with Moscow. No confirmation that war had not already begun. The captain, Valentin Savitsky, exhausted and furious, came to a conclusion that seemed logical in the darkness. If the Americans were attacking, then World War III must already be underway. He ordered the nuclear torpedo prepared. Soviet protocol required agreement from 3 officers to launch. 2 approved. The third was Arkhipov. He listened as alarms echoed through the submarine. As carbon dioxide levels rose. As sailors collapsed from heat and exhaustion. Every instinct screamed urgency. Fear pressed in from every side. But Arkhipov hesitated. He argued that no direct attack had occurred. That the depth charges were signals, not destruction. That launching a nuclear weapon without confirmation would be irreversible. That once fired, there would be no recalling what followed. His voice was calm. Firm. Almost painfully rational. Minutes passed. Finally, Savitsky stood down. The torpedo was not launched. The submarine surfaced. The moment passed. And the world never knew how close it had come to annihilation. Above the ocean, history continued to unfold. Later that same day, an American U-2 was shot down over Cuba, killing its pilot. Another nearly strayed into Soviet airspace by accident. In Washington and Moscow, leaders drafted letters and threats, each line carefully weighed against the possibility of total destruction. But beneath it all, one truth remained: nuclear war had nearly begun, not because of strategy or ideology but because of confusion, fear, and human limits. The mistake was simple. Almost invisible. Assuming the other side would think rationally under pressure. Assuming control would hold in chaos. Assuming technology could replace judgment. It nearly killed millions. And it was prevented not by a system, or a doctrine, or a weapon, but by one man who chose to pause when the world was rushing toward fire. As dawn broke over the Atlantic, the Cold War did not end. But it blinked. And humanity stepped back from the edge unaware of how close the fall had been.